Okay, and so I will just introduce Cora Skane. She has worked with WildSafeBC as a community educator in the West Kootenays for 5 years. Cora has a PhD in conservation science from UBC Vancouver, where she researched the impacts of hyperabundant deer on vegetation and ecosystems in the Gulf Islands. Currently, she's also a wetland vegetation ecologist with the Ministry of Land, Water, Lands, and Resource Stewardship within the Conservation Data Center. Before her time with WildSafe BC and the BC Ministry, Cora co-instructed first-year conservation at UBC and has worked many contracts for projects focused on restoration through the use of exclosures to exclude herbivores and on ecological modeling via statistics for wildfire ignition, escape and spread, and huckleberry production for grizzly bears. Today, Cora's sharing with us some key components of cougar biology and conflict reduction. Take it away, Cora.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the introduction. And as I start sharing my screen here, I do want to acknowledge that I am presenting today from the traditional unceded territories of the Sinixt peoples. And it is such a privilege and an honor to be able to be on these lands. And it's an interesting place where I am because the Sinixt have been declared extinct, but they are very much here, still stewarding the land. And so it's an interesting situation compared to other places where I have lived, and it's been really great to be able to have opportunities to collaborate with them and help with their initiatives. But today, here I am talking about cougar safety with WildSafe BC. And so I just want to make sure everyone can see my screen. Carla, can you see my screen all right?
Yes, I can.
Excellent. And now we'll see if it will go to the next slide. Fantastic. So WildSafe BC is one of the programs that the BC Conservation Foundation runs. And it is the provincial leader in preventing conflict with wildlife through collaboration, education, and community solutions. The BC Conservation Foundation is a broader nonprofit that fosters conservation of BC's fish, wildlife, and ecosystems. And often they promote and assist in the conservation of the fish and wildlife of the province, their protection, acquisition, or enhancement of fish and wildlife habitat. And they offer a lot of programs where they can be the administrators of funds for other groups and do the payroll and those kinds of things. But two of the programs that they run directly are WildSafe BC and the Wildlife Collision Prevention Program. WildSafe BC started as Bear Aware in Revelstoke in the early 1990s, and it was born because they had put an electric fence around their garbage dump. And before that time, the bears would frequent the garbage dump, get into the garbage. It was a common place for people to go and view the bears. They realized this was leading to a lot of habituation and food conditioning and bears hanging around town, getting into more conflict. So they put an a electric fence up around the garbage dump, and this encouraged the bears to move into town since they could no longer get that resource. So they realized that they needed to start an education program to help educate the community as to how they can prevent bears from entering into their homes through conflict management, attraction management to lead to conflict reduction. And the program was so successful in Revelstoke that they realized that one, they need it for more than just Revelstoke, and two, they need it for more than just bears. And so in 2013, WildSafe BC was born. At this time, we have over 30 communities throughout the province, mostly you see in this clustered in the southern half, but we do have one up there in the northeast. And every year we get more and more programs in, and it's been really fantastic to watch the program grow and to get more education out to more people. So today, we're talking about cougars. I want to give a brief overview of wildlife in BC and what reports we typically get to the Conservation Office Service in terms of conflict with those animals. So we have a wide variety of predators here in British Columbia, and population estimates are that there are about 3,500 cougars, about 8,000 wolves, about 15,000 grizzly bears, and greater than 140,000 black bears. When we look at the a number of reports to the Conservation Office Service. This is an example over 5 years from 2016 to 2020. You'll see the vast majority of the reports are for black bears. However, the third one down on that list is cougars. Deer is in between, and a lot of the reports for deer are both collisions with them as well as conflict with them getting aggressive while being in their gardens, etc. Whereas most of the conflicts reported for cougars, it could be a sighting in the urban area or like a town site, but often it is a cougar getting into livestock, etc. And so let's talk about cougars. Here I have a little video showing some of the beauty of the cougar, and we'll see the audio is not actually important, but it is just really nice in the background. So we'll see if you can hear the audio or not. But I just want to start this off by seeing some footage of some majestic cougars, and we'll see if it decides to load properly.
Do you mind if I have some fudge over, maybe? I want anyone knowing where you are for a while, Eric. Not even Gary? No.
So I'm curious, did the video audio come through at all? Or was it just quiet? It was just quiet. It's all right. You did get to hear some fun, the cougar breathing into the camera, so that was fun. But otherwise, just birds in the background. In terms of wildcat species in British Columbia, we have three. So we have the cougar, which is the largest by far. Then we have the bobcat, and we have the lynx. Um, Very often, it's quite easy to distinguish that cougar from a bobcat or a lynx because they're so much larger. The bobcat is the smallest of the three wildcats in British Columbia. The cougars do have the very long tails with typically they have that black or brown tip on the end of their tails, and their ears don't have those same tufts that you might get on the lynx. All Both the lynx and the cougar can have rather large paws. The bobcat tends to have much shorter paws, and the bobcats and the lynx both have very short, stubby tails. They tend to have more spots on them, where the cougars you see have no spots. There are, of course, variations. There are some cougars out here in the Kootenays that have been reported to be quite dark brown, which is quite unusual. Usually they are a little bit more of this tan, lighter brown color. One of the things that's really useful is to know how to identify the tracks. And so cougar prints lack claw marks because cats, wild and domestic, retract their claws when they're walking. And if you look at the shape of the pad of their paw, you'll see that there are those three lobes on the bottom and then a bit of a little divot on the top there. And they do tend to be a bit wider than canine tracks like wolves or domestic dogs or coyotes. And I'll just compare that here to what those typically look like. And you can see those more obvious claw marks when it's a dog species, as well as the lower side of the paw pad tends to have only two lobes or more like an upside down heart. And they do tend to be longer on average, of course. Oh, I'm sure you've seen some large domestic dog or wolf tracks that are quite wide. So it's not always that they're longer, but most of the cougar tracks I've seen are proportionally wider than the wolf and coyote tracks that I've seen. And they do tend to be 7.5 to 11 centimeters in length approximately, but of course depends on the age of that cougar as well. In terms of cougar distribution in British Columbia, they are found throughout BC, but mostly in the southern half. Vancouver Island has the highest concentration in North America with about 600 to 800 individuals. For terms of the home ranges of these animals, males typically have a home range of 130 to 400 square kilometers, and they can be up to 1,000 square kilometers. And typically the males do not overlap their ranges with other males, or if they do, it's very minorly so. Females have a much smaller home range possible. They're typically 26 to 450 square kilometers with an average of 140 square kilometers. And they frequently overlap with other females, especially female offspring that have dispersed, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. And sub-adults typically have larger home ranges than adult cougars. So when we think about how large Bowen Island is, Bowen Island has an area of about 50.12 square kilometers. And so in terms of looking at the males and the females, it is large enough to support a cougar, especially a female. And if there are abundant enough deer or other food resources, it could certainly support one male as well, but it would not likely support more than one. Maybe two females are related to each other, but that would be probably the highest tolerance most cougars would have for the overlap. In terms of their life history, they are often considered as solitary animals with the large home ranges. However, a lot of research shows that there are possibility for interactions between related animals after dispersal, especially between those mothers and their daughters. And reciprocal food sharing has been observed in cougars, both with related individuals and non-related individuals that they overlap their home ranges with. So they're not necessarily as solitary as we first thought, but they are mostly solitary in their day-to-day overall. They just do have more of these interactions with other cougars than we had first realized. They can live 10 to 20 years, but more often they live about 10 years in the wild. They can mate any time of year, unlike bears. Bears mate in the spring, and they have quite a regular annual cycle. Cougars can mate any time of the year. They'll have usually between 1 to 6 kittens, with 3 being the average, which is higher than I expected because most cougars I've seen have 1 to 2 kittens, but according to this one source, 3 was the average. And then kittens will stay for 9 months to 2 years. I've saw various different scientific literature indicating less than a year, some up to 2.5 years, but typically from 9 months to about 2 years. And when you see those cubs close to 2 years, they're the same size as their mothers. So it will look like a big group of adult cougars because they're almost adults, they're sub-adults, and they can be rather large just before they disperse. And as I mentioned in the previous slide, female cubs disperse and often overlap home ranges with their mothers, and that can lead to a lot of that reciprocal food sharing, or sometimes there will be more time spent together than just being purely solitary. But male cubs tend to disperse much further, and that is like evolutionarily evolved behavior to help reduce inbreeding. And so the males go further so they don't end up breeding with their sisters and their other relatives, and new males will move into the territory where females will stay and overlap with their siblings, their other sisters, and their mothers more often. In terms of what they eat, they are strict carnivores. They eat almost exclusively 100% meat products, and their primary prey is deer. They will prey on small mammals, including domestic cats and free-ranging dogs, if the opportunity presents it. They are most active at dawn and dusk, but they're also active throughout the night, but they're the least active during the daylight hours. It is a common misconception that they pounce from overhanging trees. They actually do not pounce from overhanging trees. They could be in a tree watching what's happening around them, but they do not pounce out of the trees to hunt. They are a stalk and pounce predator, but from the ground. And when they do have a kill, they will pull debris over a kill and return over several days to come and feed on that kill until it is fully picked clean. And they're extremely fast. They can sprint over 70 kilometers per hour. They're not going to be able to maintain that for the full hour, but they're very fast burst speed animals. So in a lot of areas, there is a lot of discussion about giving Bambi the boot or reducing deer populations. And that's because high deer populations, as a result of the elimination of predators and the reduction in hunting, has cascading effects that then results in higher deer populations, that reduces the understory vegetation, and that reduces the songbird populations. And so a lot of areas that have overabundant deer, particularly if they have the invasive fallow deer, one of the solutions that has been proposed is to restore the predators to the islands to help strive for the ecological balance. On Bowen Island, my understanding is that there are no fallow deer, it's just the native black-tailed deer, which don't tend to get into as high of abundances because they aren't a herding species like the fallow deer can be. So there's a lot of Gulf islands that have fallow deer, and those islands have significantly less understory vegetation and herbaceous vegetation and a severely lower songbird populations and diversity. However, there are also other islands that only have the native black-tailed deer that still have some of this effect as well. And so this is just showing that trophic cascade idea. On the left, you see that when you have the predator, you have fewer deer, so you have more vegetation and more birds, both in terms of diversity as well as just populations number of each species. Where on the right, when we remove that predator, suddenly you get a surge of deer, and that reduces the amount of vegetation you have, which reduces the habitat and reduces the songbird population. So not having predators in a location or hunting as like a proxy for predators can have these negative impacts on the ecosystem and reduce the diversity present. So one of the major concerns is safety. And we look at different ways and different aspects of how to reduce conflict. And as we showed at the start of the presentation, there are about 2,500 calls to the COS per year about cougars. They are a threat to livestock and pets. That livestock can be your chickens. It might be sheep. Sheep is a very common one that they get into on islands. And there have been less than 10 deaths in BC in 100 years, most on Vancouver Island, but it's not an impossibility. And children are at more risk than adults, as are short stature petite adults. And so a lot of our education, we talk a lot about these human sources of bear attractants, and there is some overlap for cougars as well. And so for bears, they eat about 30%, 20 to 30% protein based, and then 70 to 80% plants, berries, and other vegetation-based foods. And so they have a lot of additional attractants that wouldn't bring a cougar in. And that includes the bird feeders, the food crops, the landscaping, and the compost. But livestock and pet food are two major attractions that also bring in cougars to an area. And barbecue that still has meat grease on it, that also can be an attractant that might entice a cougar to come onto your back porch if you have a barbecue on there, for example. So cougars, as we mentioned, are one of the 3 wild cat species in BC, and they primarily feed on deer, but will also feed on small mammals. Free-ranging pets can be at risk. Cougars are elusive animals. They're widely distributed in BC, but tend to avoid urban areas. Attacks by cougars are rare, but can be fatal, especially if young children are involved. And so this is our starting infographic that we have that we can make available to you if you would like to use it. And some of the key points here, I'll go into a little more details, but we talk about reducing conflict. And some of the main ways to help reduce that conflict is to keep cats and other pets indoors, especially at night. That one is a particularly pertinent one for me. I did have a cat eaten by a cougar about 2 months ago because he didn't come in the evening as he was supposed to. And unfortunately, he was seen on my neighbor's trail camera along with a cougar in the same 2-week span. So it's almost certain the cougar is what got him, which is very sad. Do not feed deer that can draw cougars into your community. And so the areas that have more food for deer is going to have higher abundances of deer, and that is the primary food source for the cougar. So if you're enticing deer to come to your house to eat, you're more likely to have the cougar come and visit your property, which leads to more likelihood of having a conflict with that cougar yourself. When hiking, carry bear spray that is readily accessible and be aware of your surroundings. Be alert, be listening, be looking. In terms of cougar encounters, stop, stay calm, do not turn your back and do not run, and avoid bending down. Cougars are predator species, and so as soon as you run, it will bring out that predator prey instincts that they have, and they will start chasing you, even if they hadn't intended to before. So definitely do not run. That's also pertinent to bears, which I do not believe you have on Bowen Island, but maybe one could swim over occasionally, but I don't think that happens very often. If you have children with you and you encounter a cougar, pick up small children and pets. Look as large as possible. Maintain eye contact because that is seen as a dominance thing to a lot of animals. You want to speak firmly, and if you have bear spray, prepare it. And so if there's sticks nearby or you have hiking poles, get those up in the air, waving above you. Um, for kids, I tell them often if they're wearing a jacket, that if you unzip your jacket, you can grab the flaps and you can raise it above your head to look larger. And that is a really good trick for kids in terms of safety if they see a cougar. You then, while you're being big and talking firmly, you also want to back away slowly and seek shelter. You do want to try to get out of there, but just don't be running to do that. And in the rare event of an attack, fight back. If you have the bear spray, aim for the eyes and the face. Or even if you're just fighting back, aim for the eyes and the face too, with your hands or with sticks, anything that you have. And never play dead with a cougar. And so sometimes if you have an encounter with a bear, playing dead can be an option, but with a cougar, that is not a solution that you want to go for because um, bears are a little more nuanced. They have a lot of defensive attacks, and predatory attacks are not as common with bears, but encounters with cougars almost always are either predatory or lead becoming predatory. So you do want to fight back. As I mentioned before, it is quite common that on different islands, when a cougar arrives, that they can start killing sheep, or other livestock, chickens, pigs, goats. And so one consideration, um, broadly is that if there is food, natural or domestic, available in an area, there will be no reason for the cougar to relocate itself unless it decides to leave to search for a mate. And so that will pertain broadly to an area. So on Bowen Island, there is a lot of deer, and so there is a good foundation of food source for the cougar. If you can prevent it from accessing food sources on your own property, whether that's the dog food, your own pets, unfortunately, any livestock, then at least it will more likely stay in the wilder areas of Bowen. But at some point, it might decide that it wants to find a mate, and there's not going to be a mate on the island. And so sometimes those cougars disperse and leave at that time when they decide they do want a mate. In terms of helping to protect your livestock, something you could consider if that cougar is coming around is electric fencing. And we do have a lot of information about electric fencing on our website for WildSafeBC. There's a lot of good other resources. So I'm not going to go into great detail, but I do just want to note that electric fencing is extremely effective against having bears, grizzly bears, and black bears get into your livestock. For in terms of electric fencing for bears, we typically recommend that's only 4 feet tall. However, cougars can jump up to 3 meters into the air. So a typical electric fencing for bears design is not going to suffice for a cougar. So you might need to consider a little more advanced designs where you're either building onto existing structures. You might already have a deer fencing that is at least 7 foot high, and another thing, with or without electric fencing that can help reduce the odds of a cougar jumping over a fence is to have it be opaque, so you can't see through it. It's either sheet metal or it's fence posts. If the cougar cannot see its landing site, it is less likely to try to jump that fence, and it doesn't have to be the 3 meters tall. It can be a much shorter fence as long as it can't see where it's going to land. If there are trees immediately abutting that fence, they still might climb and be able to see inside. So just some considerations to have. But if you do decide to put electric fencing onto already existing structure, you want to make sure you're putting some of those hot wires along the bottom as well as on the top, just over the lip of the fence. And if anyone does have further questions and they do want to explore electric fencing, feel free to reach out to WildSafeBC or to myself directly at WildSafeBC, and we can talk more about that. This is an individual who went very extreme on their protection of their chickens. They have fully enclosed, and then they have the electric fencing as well. So if you have chickens, this is another consideration. Be very hard for a cougar or a bear, which once again, Bowen, you don't have to worry about bears at this time, but it would be a lot more challenging for a predator species to get into there and get to those chickens. So I do have a second video here. Let's see if this will play. Can't tell if it's trying to think or not. All right, we're gonna skip. Oh, I don't know what you all see, but this is not the slide. Trying to play that video has made my PowerPoint very unhappy. Okay, here we go. We got through to the next slide. So the next thing I want to talk about is relocation, or often they use the term translocation. And there have been very few academic sources that look specifically at the success rate of translocating cougars. There have been, in the last 2 or 3 years, there actually have been a few meta-analyses looking at predators at large, but many of them only have 2 to 4 cases that are cougar specific. I did find one resource that did have cougars in South America when they were relocated. And in South America, there actually was pretty high success rate. But I do want to share just a little bit about this case study in New Mexico from 1998. So they relocated 14 cougars, or translocated. 9 of them, unfortunately, died, and 2 of the 5 remaining living ones did return to their original home range where they had been translocated from. So 3 of the 14 were successfully translocated and did not return. But very often, for a lot of predator species, translocation has a really high fatality rate. Often it's just from being dropped off into a new area where there's already other cougars there, or bears if it's a bear situation. And that can lead to a lot of fighting. They also don't have an idea of where all the food sources are because they're new to that area. And so sometimes they starve. And so very often translocation is not considered for a lot of species. In BC, we do consider it for grizzly bears, and we sometimes consider it for cougars as well in certain situations. So in 2022, there was a cougar that had swam over to Protection Island off the coast of Nanaimo, and they did translocate that cougar. And so Protection Island is less than 2 kilometers squared. It's a very small island. In the report here, they say that once caught, wildlife veterinarians and biologists will assess the animal's health and behavior and release it in a location decided by a biologist. And it was really important for this next statement is that all indications are that the animal is still acting normally, which is why the intention is still to relocate the animal. And Provo and Graham have previously said conservation officers didn't want to intervene because the cougar was exhibiting normal behavior and not being aggressive. And so I mentioned earlier 2 different terms that are really important to keep in mind. And one is habituation, and that is when an animal loses their fear of humans. And the second is food conditioning, where an animal has now learned to associate humans and or their infrastructure, such as their houses, their farms, with a food reward. And so animals that become habituated and or food conditioned are more likely to start getting more brazen around people and could start forming aggressive behaviors. And when that happens, an animal is not eligible to be translocated. When an animal exhibits aggressive behaviors, if it gets to the point where it is seen as a public safety threat, the COS will come and destroy that animal. And it's really important it doesn't exhibit those. So if it has normal cougar behaviors, typically they won't even consider translocation. But on Protection Island specifically, because it was so small, there wasn't much of a food source available for that cougar. There aren't hundreds or even dozens of deer in this small island of less than 2 kilometers squared with about 300 residents. And so they did translocate that cougar specifically. And when we look here, there you could look at it by month, and then within that you see it by year. They do sometimes translocate cougars, and in this specific case, in March, over the last 14 years or so, only one cougar has been translocated in March, and that was the one in Protection Island. But in the same time frame for January, there were 2 cougars that were translocated, for example. But you can also see the number of cougars destroyed by the COS, destroyed by other, and then destroyed total, and number of cougars that were hazed. And hazing is a practice where you try to do different techniques to make the animal lose the association of being around people and having that reward of food. But it can be very dangerous to haze an animal, and it's not all situations is that an eligible consideration. So when is it considered to translocate a cougar? For one, if it has dispersed to an island or a location with very little food source to sustain it. Two, if it's trapped within an urban setting with no safe way out, like for example, if there's a large city like Vancouver and it somehow got into a small little um, forested like park in near downtown and it can't safely get itself out, that would be another situation where they would consider translocating a cougar. However, if it's displaying habituated or food conditioned behavior, it will just continue those problems now that it's learned those behaviors and it will be destroyed instead. So the best thing that we can do for the cougar is to prevent it from developing those behaviors as best as we can by not letting it get any food rewards on our property. Of course, in an area like Bowen Island where it's small, you might be seeing it more often than you would in an area that has a lot more forest for it to hide in. Other considerations is that it is very expensive to translocate an animal, and the animal often returns. So there is a very low success rate in translocation as well. So it's not likely an option for Bowen Island, given there is food source available there, and if it does start exhibiting problematic behaviors, it would more likely be destroyed. And so many cougars never pose a threat to people directly. However, sometimes it does happen. There are cases, especially on Vancouver Island, where cougars do start engaging in attacking people. And so it's really important to know what we can do for cougar safety. And I talked a little bit about some of these points already, but I really want to emphasize them and go into a little more details and nuances over some of them. Broadly, avoid encounters. I'll give a little more details on recommendations on how to avoid encounters. But part of that is being aware of your surroundings, not having headphones in and running through the forest looking at your feet. Be aware of what's around you. If you see a cougar, usually it is not stalking you, but there are situations where cougars are escorting someone or warning them. And there have been cases in the West Kootenays where I live where a cougar has very slowly followed people out. And it was deemed that that cougar had cubs near the area. And so that cougar was actually escorting those people away from its cubs. And so sometimes cougars would do behaviors like that. And very often, if you see them, they're not trying to hunt you. They're a very stealthy animal. And typically, if they're hunting you, you don't see them in advance. I will say, very many people I've talked to have felt this feeling on the back of their neck when a cougar has been watching them. And they have had that tingly sensation that goes down, and they've slowly turned around and they've seen a cougar. And so be aware of what your body's telling you as well. I don't know how that happens, but often people do seem to sense when a cougar is watching them. Once again, if you see a cougar, stop, stay calm, do not run, do not turn your back. Maintain that eye contact, look big, yell, be assertive, back away slowly. And if attacked, fight back. Stay together as a group too. If you're with a group of people, do not spread out. The more you stay together and the larger group you are, the more intimidating you will be. And like any living mammal, you make a cost benefit analysis. And if it seems like there's too many people that it would be too dangerous to take on, they're less likely to take on a group of people, especially if they're yelling, looking aggressive, looking big. And once again, if you have that bear spray, use it. So to avoid an encounter with a cougar, you should be prepared to travel in groups and keep everyone together. Be especially cautious when traveling during dusk and dawn when wildlife is most active, both the cougar and their potential prey species. Travel slowly, do not wear earbuds, be alert. Make noise to alert a cougar of your presence to help reduce the chances of startling it. Keep your dog on a leash at all times and walk your dog during daylight hours if possible. Obviously, this time of year, that gets a little more challenging. I know where I am, the sun sets by 4 p.m. and I work 8:30 to 5:30, so it doesn't leave a lot of daylight hours. But I've been trying, for me, I've been lucky, I've been taking longer lunches to hike them at lunch. But there, where I live, it's very common that a dog will sense a cougar long before you're near the cougar. Like, I live near Nakusp, BC, and every few years we get a cougar on Alexander Road, and it's reported frequently that the dog just refuses, just dig its heels in, refuses to continue walking. Person turns around and then they see on Facebook that someone was driving past and they saw a cougar in the ditch about a block away from where that dog insisted that they turn around and go back. So dogs can be a really great alert system, but having them on leash is really important because otherwise, if they're off leash, they can instigate a little bit more of an interaction, which often will lead to the cougar attacking the dog and potentially the person. If you come into an area and you see or smell a dead animal, leave the area immediately. Um, as I mentioned earlier, cougars cache their kills and their food, and they'll come back over several days to get to that food source. And it's really important that we um, leave that food there. And if it's on a hiking trail, for example, or a common walking path, really important to close that area off from people for at least typically a week. And then reassess is see how things are going, but close that area off, prevent people from going through that area. Cougars are very protective of their food sources, and that could lead to an attack if you get too close to one. Obviously, if one is on your property, you might want to get it off your property so that the cougar isn't coming back to your property regularly. But do be aware that if there is a cougar kill on your property, be very cautious around that because the cougar might be nearby still. Never approach, entice, or feed wildlife. So if you see a cougar, once again, do not approach the animal. That might sound obvious, but I've seen a lot of social media posts where people are definitely approaching wildlife. Do not approach a predator species. Do not approach a cougar in particular. Once again, face the cougar. Do not turn your back. Retreat slowly. Do not run or play dead. Try to appear bigger. Immediately pick up your small children. Be aggressive. Shout, wave a stick, or throw rocks to deter the attack. And if an attack is imminent, use that bear spray. Particularly when it comes to size, high-pitched voices, and quick movements. So I really recommend talking to your children and teaching them what to do if they encounter a cougar. If you live in or near cougar habitat, here are some additional tips. Children should play in groups. So the more children you have together, the less likely a cougar will try to encounter them. And do not leave children unsupervised. Ideally, have an adult in the area, both in terms of making the group seem less enticing to the cougar to approach, but also you're able to be there, yell and scream, and help intervene if it gets to that stage. Consider getting a dog or using a dog as an early warning system. A dog can see, smell, and hear a cougar sooner than a human can. However, be aware, once again, as I mentioned earlier, that off-leash dogs can attract and bring cougars and bears back to you. Consider erecting a fence around play areas. While cougars can leap or scale most fences, a solid wood fence that prevents a cougar from looking into a yard may lower the chance that a cougar will access the yard. So I talked about this in terms of livestock earlier, but this also can be in consideration for your yard for children's safety. Make sure children are home before dusk and stay indoors until after dawn, the period of time that cougars are most active. And if there have been cougar sightings, escort children to the bus stop early in the morning. Clear away shrubs away from the bus stops, making a radial area of about 9 meters, the recommendation. Depending on where your location is, that might not be feasible, but trying to not have really close to the bus stop, just trying to remove some of that vegetation that cougar could be hiding in and stalking and waiting for prey, especially if you're going to have children waiting there for the school bus, for example. And another thing, you can install a light at the bus stop, which may also increase security and reduce the chances of the cougar going to that area. So I did mention bear spray as a means to help in a potential encounter with a cougar. So we also do a very in-depth bear spray safety presentation, and we're not going to dive into that, but I am going to give you just the basics of the bear spray and how to use it. And so firstly, what is bear spray? It contains 1 to 2% capsaicin, which works by strongly irritating the mucous membranes of mammals, being their eyes, the nose, the lungs. That capsaicin is that stingy bit that comes from hot peppers. And so if you ever cut up ghost peppers, you might have had a little bit of an experience with a little bit of some of those effects. The other two ingredients are an emulsifier and a propellant. So those are the 3 ingredients within bear spray. And you use it at a close distance when an attack is imminent. If we look at the effectiveness or the efficacy of bear spray, Smith, Herrero, and others in 2009 looked at 83 incidents over 21 years from 1985 to 2006. And they, at this time, called it pepper spray, but they're referring to bear spray. And it stopped the attack 90% for black bears and 92% for grizzly bears. And 98% of the people who used bear spray in their defense were uninjured. 11% received some bear spray effects. So sometimes you do get it blown back on yourself, but if it's going to prevent a mauling, it's definitely worth using. And so there have been some studies that show it is effective on cougars as well, but I don't have the exact numbers for how effective it is with the cougars. Some advantages of bear spray over firearms, for example, is that it does not require a special permit to purchase, although you do need to be 18 years or over. Training is easily available and relatively short. The sessions we do are 1 to 2 hours long maximum. It's widely available. I know where I live, I can buy bear spray at my local gas stations. That might not be true on Bowen, but there hopefully would be, if you went to the mainland, you'd be able to get some bear spray pretty easily. There's no lasting harm to people and animals. It's extremely unpleasant. There's no lasting harm. And you do not need to be accurate or shoot to kill. And it can be used safely if your partner is being attacked. There have been many cases in bear attacks where one person is being mauled by a bear and the other person, because they've startled a bear, in some situations they're mountain biking, they come around a corner, they smack into a bear at high speeds. The bear retaliates because something just hit it and hurt it. And if you have bear spray, sometimes that is enough to get the bear off of your friend and to get the bear to move on. Your friend also might get some bear spray, but once again, it's better to not be mauled than to have short-term unpleasant effects of bear spray. So just some safety tips around that bear spray. You want to treat it with respect like a firearm. Use both hands to hold it when possible, as seen in this photo here. Do not fire a test shot. Save every bit of that spray. Only fire a 2-second burst at first. That is often enough to deter an animal, but then you still have several seconds left in your canister if the attack continues. Keep in mind that wind will affect the direction and the distance the spray can spray. And in modern bear spray with the emulsifier and the propellant, it usually sprays about 1.5 to 2.5 meters in front of you in ideal conditions. The old formula before 2012, if you ever watched Staying Safe in Bear Country, it shot several meters like a fire hose. It doesn't do that anymore. That recipe that they used to, the formula, did shoot further, but you had to be more accurate and it was quite flammable, whereas the modern day formula for bear spray is no longer flammable and it forms a cloud. And so it doesn't go as far, but you don't have to be as accurate because you spray it in the general direction of the animal and it forms a large cloud. But if you're downwind, keep in mind it's going to be coming at you. So as soon as you fire it, you want to be backing up and be prepared that you might get some bear spray effects. And we recommend, if you're thinking you might use bear spray, you want to be ready in less than 2 seconds to disperse that bear spray. And we recommend practice using inert. Do not practice using expired bear spray because what expires in that bear spray is actually the propellant, not the capsaicin. So bear spray that is expired can still be very potent, but it doesn't spray as far. So you are more likely to get to dribble on your hands. There haven't been studies that I know of that look at how long after it's expired does it lose that capability, and there's so many factors that will impact it because you're supposed to store bear spray between 0 degrees Celsius and 50 degrees Celsius. So depending on the lifespan of that bear spray, what it's experienced before its expiry date will really impact how long it will still be good after. And so we just recommend if it has expired, get a new bear spray. Let's see if this video will work. It's just a quick 1 or 2 minute video on bear spray.
Using bear spray, we want to.
Oh, right, but you can't hear it. You can hear it?
S. Stop and assess the situation. E. Prepare to remove your spray. Remove it with your dominant hand and place your non-dominant hand on the bottom of the can. R. Remove the safety. A. Build a wall from the ground up. Y. Yield. Take a step back and reassess the situation.
Excellent. So you were able to hear that video?
Yeah, it was a little bit quiet, but we could mostly hear it. I could anyways.
I hope most people could. I was wondering if there's any way I could have turned it up. I don't know if there is.
Yeah.
But that's kind of the very basics of what to consider for how to use that bear spray. And you saw in there just how that spray comes out and kind of starts funneling out. And like I said, we do have a lot more training available for those who are interested in bear spray safety, and we do have a lot of good resources on our WildSafeBC page. Oh, no, I'm trying to get to the next page. The computer says, no, you shall not go to the next slide. It's going to play it again.
When using bear,
I think it's because I made this video the entire size of the slide, so I can't leave it. We're just going to have to jump it. Apologies. I have only 2 slides left. All right, can you see my presentation again?
Yeah, we can see it again.
Excellent. So that's good for me to know. If I make a video the entire slide, it's really hard to move on from it when sharing on Zoom. But once again, that acronym, the same thing if you're dealing with a cougar. If you have your bear spray on you, you come across a cougar, you want to stop and assess the situation. Is that cougar moving away from you? Is that cougar watching you and kind of interested? Is that cougar slowly coming towards you? Then if you see a cougar in general, I'd recommend do what we say is prepare, which is take it out of your holster, have it in your hands, have 2 hands on it. R is for that remove that safety. So if that cougar is actually coming towards you, remove that safety. If it's walking away from you, you don't need to remove the safety yet, but do you have it still prepared and ready? And then A is build that wall, or if it's so close that you have no chance to build a wall, we say aim for the face. Get into those mucous membranes. And then Y is for yield, and that's to back up right after you spray the spray, and that 1 produces more space between you and the animal, and 2, more space between you and the bear spray. So if it is going to start blowing back at you, you'll get fewer bear spray effects if you back up and yield. No running, just kind of walk backwards slowly. And so those were the main things that I had today. I talked a little bit about some of the biology of cougars. I did talk about when translocation could be considered and why it's probably not a consideration for Bowen Island. I talked about safety around cougars and bear spray. I also talked about some attractant management and conflict reduction considerations to help prevent the cougar from coming onto your properties and getting more habituated and food conditioned. And those are the main things. And so I look forward to having the opportunity to have some questions, and I can try to help and answer some of those.
Thank you so much, Cora. That was a really great presentation. And yeah, thank you for the presentation. I learned so much. I thought I knew quite a bit, but I think I knew less than I thought. So yeah, if anyone wants to ask a question, we can take questions now. Please use the raise hand function under the react icon at the bottom of your screen. So we've got one question. And Davina, if you want to unmute yourself, you can turn your camera on if you want or not, but go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, sorry, I was having trouble unmuting myself. I have a couple of questions, if that's okay. The first one is I had read that it was a sign of, they would see it as a sign of aggression if you kept direct eye contact and that you should look at their paws. So I just wanted to confirm that because I know that you had said to look at them directly in the eye, and I would find it hard to not look them in the eye, to be quite honest.
Yeah, I will say I've also heard various opinions on this where because a lot of animals do see it as a sign of dominance and aggression, often they say don't do it. I think why our official messaging for why you should do it with a cougar is that you are trying to come off as the dominant individual. Like, so you actually do want to come off a little bit aggressive if they're actually looking like they're going to come in and counter you and fight you. You want to have it think that you are the aggressor. And I will say I have read mixed reviews on that.
Okay. Well,
So I understand. I've heard both. But our official messaging is to maintain that eye contact and to be aggressive and assertive and yelling and looking scary to the animal.
okay, and that actually brings me to the next question. If you're out walking and you see the cougar,
Mhm.
do you automatically start yelling and pulling your jacket up and trying to look bigger? Or would you just start to back away and then if it starts to follow you, then you try to make noise and look bigger? Like, is
I I would first walk away, like slowly backing up before moving to the aggression stage,
okay,
personally. But if it looks at you and starts walking towards you, then I would immediately start yelling and looking big. But I also think it is important to also try to live in harmony as much as we can and
yeah,
not startle it if it somehow hasn't seen you.
right,
And so I would first start walking away backwards before moving to the aggressive stage.
okay. Thank you.
Good questions.
Okay.
So we have one question in the chat, and the question is, what is the likelihood that the cougar will leave on his or her own? Maybe mating season?
Yeah, and I was talking to the conservation officers about this, trying to see, I'm like, do you have a sense of how often and how quickly they tend to move on? And they kind of said it's just so variable. It's really hard to know. And they can mate at any time of year. And if it is a sub-adult male, he might be more inclined to try to mate sooner. Um, or if it's a male of any kind, I think he'd be more likely to leave to try to find a mate sooner than a female might be to leave. Um, but I think that there's not really a definitive answer. And I wish I could give you more of an answer. I was trying to reach out to some additional cougar biologists as well to see in their experience if they knew some statistics that I could bring, but I haven't been able to get any yet. So if I do get any, I will pass them on to Carla to share with all of you.
Thanks, Cora. And I have kind of a follow-up question that someone had asked me in advance of the session here, which had to do with that. And maybe you won't know the answer to this necessarily either, but it has to do with the expectation that the cougar might leave the island once it has that instinct to mate. But they were wondering if it doesn't find a mate, could that then spark a difference in behavior or some aggression from the cougar?
Yeah, right. I forgot to ask that question. So I'm going to write this question down. Um, if cannot find mate, will it become more aggressive,
I mean, or
especially if it's a male?
yeah, or do we think it's more likely to leave if it's
Yeah,
doesn't
that
find
is
it?
something I will try to get an answer for you from. I'm trying to get in touch with Dr. Christopher. What was his last name? I'm not sure my screen worked good. His name is Dr. Christopher. He works for Panthera. His name is Christopher someone, and I think he might be able to answer this question for me. Christopher, I'm almost there. Everett. So I am going to continue to reach out to Christopher Everett because I think he'll have some good insight on this specific question.
That's great. Thanks, Cora. I'm just going to take one more question from the chat and then I'll go to Mary Lynn. So Davina had a follow-up question. Could this cougar have more than one cache on the island?
I would say yes, it could, certainly. Um, I don't know what the number of caches are typically, but it is quite energetically expensive to hunt. And so I could see it having two, potential two or three, but part of it might be opportunistic. So I think it could have more than one at a time. But I don't think it's going to have like 20. And maybe I'm wrong, but I think it wouldn't have too many at a time. I will also ask Christopher that question.
We'll go to Mary Lynn now. If you want to unmute yourself and you can turn your camera on if you'd like to or not. Up to you. Go ahead and ask your question.
Oh, hi there. Sorry, I'm just laying down because I have a sore back, so I
Oh,
didn't want to show all that. But anyway, here I am. I don't live on Bowen, but I go there to the Rivendell retreat fairly regularly, and I'm planning on being there in January. And I'm so sorry I had to miss the whole beginning of this meeting, so I kind of missed a lot of it, most of it. But I'm just curious to know a few things. Like, is it determined that this cougar's from Keats Island or not? Is that sort of
um,
an unknown still?
sort of still unknown. When I talked to the conservation officers, I heard that that's unknown at this stage.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's possible, but it's an unknown.
But it's the most likely because it's the closest, and the cougar keeps hanging around Cape Roger Curtis, I think, mostly whenever I see a post on
Mhm.
the Facebook page saying, oh, spotted here, there, or the other place, it tends to be in that area, I
Yeah.
think.
Although
Yeah.
I don't think it would be impossible for it to swim over from the mainland either. It's not
Mm.
that far, but I will try to get
Oh,
information on like what
wow.
is an expected distance.
Yeah. Why would they do that? Like, I don't understand why a cougar would choose to swim so
I
far
know,
away.
yeah. And it could be like depending where they were. If it was, for example, if it was on Keats and it decided, there's not enough food anymore. If it's from a smaller island or an island where it feels like there's not enough food, it could relocate. If it's
Mm-hmm.
from the mainland, if it is a sub-adult male that is just dispersing from its mother, their territory it's already in might already
Mm-hmm.
have a dominant male, likely its father. And
Mm-hmm.
so he might have to have gone anywhere
So
and
this is a male. It's determined this is a
we
male
don't know
cougar.
if it's a male or a
Okay.
female.
And how
But
about the age? Because of the size, can they figure out the more or less the age of the
I'd
cougar?
asked that as well, and the conservation
No.
officers told me not really unless you capture it
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
actually like sex it after it's been
Oh, wow.
tranquilized. And I was like, oh,
Yeah.
I thought like you might because like a sub-adult male could be the same size as a female. So if
Hmm.
it was a certain size larger, it would more
Hmm.
likely be a male. But if it was smaller, it would be less certain whether it was a male or a
So it
female.
might be more like teenager or
It could
whatever. Yeah.
exactly. And so
Okay.
it could be a male that recently dispersed, couldn't stay on the
Yeah.
mainland because it overlapped home range with another male and saw that
Mm.
land over there and tried to disperse across the water. Could be
Oh,
a
that's
female still
amazing.
who also did that. But I'll try to
That's
find out
amazing.
what an
Can you imagine
expected.
being in a boat and seeing a cougar swimming?
Oh, I know. And there was a blog post online that I read of someone on a Gulf island where exactly that happened. They were on a boat and they saw a cougar swimming over to one of the islands.
God, that's so funny.
That would be quite the experience.
Yeah. So, in terms of politics, like, is there a reason, like, what's the jurisdiction that sort of decides? Is it the Wildlife Society that decides how they're going to handle this cougar, or is it a political issue, or what it like? Because I know Bowen Island is very, Green Party, pro-Green Party quite a lot. So I would guess that it's a lot about respecting the animal and respecting, basically Mother Nature. But is it to do with the wildlife conservatory or society, or is it more to do with political reasons why it's been a hands-off approach all this time?
Yeah, it's typically the conservation officer service that will make a decision, and they will base it on the likelihood of public threat based on the behavior that the cougar or animal is exhibiting. And
Yeah.
so I do want to say if this cougar is getting into chicken coops, is watching children, please do call the COS and let them know that is happening because it's
Right.
really important for them to have a record of any potentially escalating behavior so that they can
Mhm.
reassess um,
Yeah.
whether that threat has crossed the threshold and that they might need to come and deal with the cougar. If it stays below a public threat threshold, then they will just continue letting it live, but we definitely don't want to wait until an incident happens
Exactly. That's what
before
I keep
something
thinking.
happens.
Like, are they waiting for an incident to happen before they do
Yeah.
something?
Yeah.
And
So I
I'm a
think,
little on the fence. I mean, I understand respect for nature, but at the same
yeah.
time, there are a lot of children on Bowen and small dogs and all of that.
Yeah.
I
And so I definitely
would
do
hate to see
recommend
that happen.
keeping the COS in the loop. When I talked to the
Mhm.
COS earlier this week, they said they hadn't heard anything in a few weeks or months, but I
Mm.
know that it has been seen just 2.5, 3 weeks ago. It sounded like it was even earlier before that that the COS had last had a report.
For what
Which,
COS?
oh, sorry, the Conservation Officer Service.
Oh, oh,
And
okay.
so um, what often happens is that people will call early on, they send reports, and then nothing happens because usually early on there is no aggressive behavior seen, and then people stop calling, which sometimes is fine. If the behavior doesn't change, it's fine. But if the behavior changes, it's really important to keep the COS in the loop. But sometimes people think,
Hmm.
oh, well, they didn't do anything when I first called, so I'm not going to call again.
Hmm.
But just keep in mind, if that behavior has changed, that is new information that is really
Hmm.
pertinent for them to have.
Hmm. Hmm. And they are nocturnal, right? So they're typically wandering around at night
Yeah,
as soon as or at dusk, as soon as it's
exactly.
dark, and
Yeah,
then also at dawn before it gets bright. So
yeah,
basically in the dark. Okay, so that's something to
exactly. That's when they're
keep in
most active.
mind.
Doesn't mean
Oh,
you can't see it during the day, but they're most active at dusk and dawn, and then the next most active is overnight when it's dark.
overnight. Isn't that interesting? So, what's the other thing I wanted to know? Um, well, so
Marilyn,
from your presentation, is it the bear spray that's the ideal, or because I just that's where I got in is quite late in the call, but is that the recommended thing to have, or is there something else that I missed?
Yeah, and so I did talk about the first steps could be if the cougar is coming towards you, first being loud, being assertive, yelling
Yeah,
at it.
I
You
know
can
that.
have
Yeah.
sticks, get the sticks up. If the cougar keeps coming at you, then the next best defense is that bear spray.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks very much for answering my questions.
Yeah,
I
thank
might
you for
have
coming.
more, but I'm not going to open a whole discussion
Yeah.
on whatever questions pop in my mind because I'm sure you have a curfew here. So thank you very much.
thanks, Marilyn. Um, so, I mean, we had another question in the chat asking if it was male or female, but I think we've answered that one.
Yeah,
Um,
the best of my knowledge, I've been told the COS that they haven't been able to tell. They don't know. But one of them did mention that there or someone had mentioned, was it either Carla? I thought it was also the Conservation Office Service that there's a cougar biologist that is on the island sometimes. And I feel like the COS had told me that there might be someone who might be able to better estimate, at least, not know for sure, but better estimate. But at this time, they don't know if it's male or female.
Thanks, Cora. And then I'll take one more question from the chat. Was Lisa asked where was the cougar last seen and asked for a reliable sighting. And I'll just say that I know there was some video, like security footage shot of the cougar passing by a house at night, like in the middle of the night kind of thing. So it was on November 25th. And I think that that's, as far as I know, the last sighting that there's been, unless anyone has something else to add that they've heard of something different
Do you know the
than.
broad area on the island that footage was from?
Yeah, it was from King Edward Bay. So it's the same neighborhood. It's been spotted in that neighborhood quite a bit.
Hmm.
Davina, do you want to go ahead and unmute yourself and you can ask your questions?
Sure. Yeah, I'm just wondering now that winter is here, and I know cougars generally don't like to swim, but obviously this one did. What is the likelihood of it deciding, like, I don't know what their tolerance is, but the water's getting cold, right? So what is the likelihood that it might decide, I'm going to hang out here for the winter until the spring?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think to my dogs, and they seem to have no avoidance of water in the winter.
Okay.
And so I wonder, like cougars have quite thick fur, very thick. I don't know if you've ever touched a pelt, but sometimes they're, especially in the winter, they fluff right out. They're so cute. But I will ask Christopher that as well. Um, my gut instinct would be that it would probably reduce a little bit the likelihood, but I don't think it would reduce it that much. I think it'd be more about food availability.
Yeah, and I guess the call of the wild would probably trump the cold water.
Mhm.
Maybe a mate will swim over here.
Right?
Heaven forbid.
Davina, he
Thank
had another question in the chat that I wasn't sure if you wanted to clarify because he said could have been chased from the territory or looking for a mate. Were you meaning that that's why the cougar came here?
Oh, I was just kind of because someone was asking what made it swim here, and I was just saying it could maybe it was. I think you were sort of answering that while I was
Yeah.
typing this, that it could have been a territorial issue.
Yeah. And it could
Something,
have, like you said, it could have literally been chased.
yeah,
It
exactly
could
like
have,
a fight.
yeah, very possible.
And once
Or
I
it could have
imagine it.
just
Oh, sorry, go
been,
ahead.
sorry, it could have just been dispersing, looking for its own territory. It could have been looking for a mate as well. That's definitely
Yeah.
definitely possible, especially if it is a sub-adult male and it's dispersing to not mate with its sisters. It could have been
Yeah.
looking for an unrelated female.
Okay.
Mhm.
All right, that was it. Thank you.
So another question in the chat is, do our sheep farms have dogs in the field? And I'm not sure if anyone of us are qualified to answer this question. I'm not sure how many sheep farms there are on Bowen. I do recall one, um, but if anyone has any insight into that, I'd welcome an answer. And I'm just gonna guess no one knows the answer to that one. So,
I'm curious
um,
too.
and then, oh, and two, Enswell and Cidery would have the sheep. Right. And so, um, okay. Well, I guess we still don't know about if there's dogs there, but we could ask them individually, I guess. Mary Lynn's other question was that she wanted to ask if the cougar had been seen at Killarney Lake. And I could probably answer that question. I think that I'm aware of most of the sightings. I have been in contact with the Conservation Officer Service fairly regularly and do get a lot of calls at the municipality. We are, tracking different sightings and just to make sure we're in the loop. And there haven't been any sightings right at Killarney Lake around the trails there, somewhat close in the Mount Gardner area, but not right in the recreational area. If there's no other questions, I mean, I did have one question emailed to me, and I think you answered it pretty well already because you talked a lot about bear spray. But Kathy did ask, when I am in grizzly country, I walk with bear spray, and here I don't. Should I be walking on the trails with bear spray? And I guess, you've said it's a good tool, but do you think that the threat is great enough at this point that everyone should be using or walking in the trails with bear spray on them?
Yeah, it's a good question. Like, I feel like it's probably at this stage, from the sounds of it, more of a comfort thing for each person. Um, and it's interesting because I live in the middle of a mountain on off-grid property, and as soon as winter comes, I put my bear spray away because it can't be stored below 0 degrees. But there's still cougars everywhere, and I haven't been carrying my bear spray, but it's never excessive to do so. Like, if you know there's a cougar around and you have the bear spray, you might as well carry it. Um, and you never know when that behavior could escalate. I always think it's a good tool to have with you. And as I was putting this together, I was like, I should be carrying my bear spray when I'm out hiking with my dogs in the winter because there's cougars everywhere. I come across cougar paw prints while I'm hiking my dogs. Um, Never seen a cougar, but I see their paw prints pretty regularly out here. Um, but there's been no reports. No one's seen these cougars out here. There's like where I live, just 3 kilometers up the highway, there used to be a very large, several 100-pound male that people saw regularly, but it passed about 3 years ago. And just this year, people are starting to see on their trail cameras more often. A cougar is getting pretty large, so it's probably one of his offspring that has filled his niche, essentially. Um, and it hasn't caused any problems yet. But like the one stat, there's been fewer than 10 deaths by cougars in 100 years in British Columbia, but there doesn't mean there's not attacks. Like some of those news articles I showed, especially on Vancouver Island in particular, those tend to be where most of the cougars end up attacking people. So it's never a bad idea. Long answer.
No, I think that's great. Thanks for clarifying that. We do have another question. Is that Fove?
Yes. Hi. I had a quick question. We have a school at the Cape called Island Discovery, and so that's kind of where the cougar likes to hang out. And our kids, we are like about 50 kids, and on some days, a lot of them take the public bus to the school. And I'm curious if you like it lets out and they walk through the forest. That the like we've actually seen the cougar running in that forest in the day. where our kids walk to school. So I'm just like curious, do you think that that is not a good idea, that we shouldn't be having the kids walking that walk and driving our kids to school?
Yeah, I wonder, is there any way like a teacher could meet them there with bear spray, for example, and like escort them to the school? I wonder, like,
The some of our teachers will stand at the hill from the school and look down and watch them, but I'm kind of like, I don't think you could do anything if you were sitting
if you're
like,
that far away.
looking
Yeah.
that far away. So part
And
like I've been driving my kids because I'm like,
yeah,
yeah,
I mean, it's
but
definitely a consideration. One of the things that does
okay.
help if the bus is dropping them all off at once, at least they are a large group of kids.
Yeah, we
If
do that. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
if they stay together and there's not like someone in the back picking flowers and be like, oh no, the group. They it would be better to make sure like you really emphasize they all stick together. It's probably okay, but since the cougar has been seen there, it's never a bad idea to have a little extra adult around or like if you don't feel comfortable with it, totally drive your kids to the school.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um but hopefully if a lot of people start driving their kids to the school and the group got really small, then I'd really recommend an adult go and meet them at the bus stop and help escort them over just to be safe. Like there haven't been any reports that I know of this cougar trying to encounter a child, but when it comes to children's safety, I really think taking the extra precautions, even if they seem excessive, is not a bad idea. Um,
And
especially
you would recommend that that adult have bear spray then for that
I
walk?
would, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, like the
Okay.
likelihood of needing to use it is quite low,
Okay.
especially with a big group like that. But it's just such a good tool to have, especially once again when it comes to kids. Like, just protect them as much as possible.
Okay. Thank
Yeah,
you.
that would be my broad recommendations.
So Cora, we had a follow-up question about bear spray, and Davina was wondering, will bear spray be as effective if the temperature is freezing level or lower? I think you were mentioning that you don't carry yours anymore because it's too cold, or
Yeah. Um, I do often wonder that because they say don't store it below 0 degrees. But I do think if you're at least storing it in your house most of the time, and then you have it on your body while you're walking between places, that will help a bit, firstly. Like, but I do think if it's in the cold for several hours, it will spray less far, is my understanding. Because my understanding is the emulsifier doesn't deal, and the propellant, and thus the propellant, doesn't deal as well with the cold. And so I think that it is less of a cohesive fog when it gets really cold. And so if you're storing it in the warm house and then you have it on you for that hour, it's probably okay. But I think about like my backcountry ski trips where I'm like, okay, I've been outside in -20 for 5 hours. It's not going to be very useful at that stage. So I think there is like a little bit of a consideration on both those parts. If it's in the cold for a long time, I do believe it will spray less far, might dribble more. And so trying to keep it warm in between. And I think a lot of it is more long-term storage in the cold that really makes it reduce its capacity. But definitely, once again, several hours in the cold would potentially reduce some of its capacity as well.
yeah, that's great. That's super helpful. Um, I have got one more question in the chat from Lisa. Will cougars avoid areas of high activity or noise, such as the construction areas where large equipment and with large equipment and activity going on?
I'd say typically yes, but just like people, different cougars have different personalities, different experiences. So typically, most wildlife, cougars, bears, etc., will avoid those higher noise areas. Um, but there's always exceptions. So if this cougar has learned, oh, if I hear that sound, I can steal a sandwich, then it might have learned something contrary to its instincts and might go over there. But usually, the more sound, as long as it's not enticing prey, it will usually avoid that area.
Makes sense.
Mhm.
Okay, well, I think that's it for the chat. Did anyone have any other questions? Kind of a last call here, I think. Someone's just joined. Um, okay, well, I think we'll probably leave it there. I just want to say thanks again, Cora. This has been really enlightening, and I really appreciate you taking the time to teach us a little bit more about cougars. Well, a lot more actually, and We had quite a few comments in the chat saying thank you as well. So I know that the community appreciates it as well. And yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute delight to present to you all tonight. And I do have a list of about 7 questions that I will try to get follow-up answers for and pass on to Carla. Maybe you can put on the website where this link is posted for this video.
I
And
will.
just, yeah, thank you. If you have any other questions, again, related to any of this, feel free to email WildSafeBC, email me directly at WildSafeBC, or email Carla maybe, and she can pass them
Yeah,
on. I don't know if you want to take that on, but
yeah, no, definitely. Definitely. It's no problem.
perfect. Thank you so much once again, everyone.
Yeah. And thanks everyone for coming.